Recording played twice in that courtroom. The first time, the room went quiet in that polite, professional way that courtrooms do. The second time, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My daughter-in-law sat at the defense table with her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still, like a woman waiting for a bus. My son had his eyes on the floor. The voice on the recording was hers, crystal clear. 14 months of marriage had taught me to recognize it anywhere. If we wait for him to die naturally, Derek gets the money, and we get nothing. The will splits everything between the foundation and Derek. But if he's declared incompetent, if we can get him committed, the court appoints a guardian, and if we've already filed the power of attorney paperwork, that's fraud. My son's voice. Quieter. Uncertain. It's estate planning. The jury didn't find that distinction as she did. My name is Norman Hale. I'm 67 years old. For 31 years, I was a cardiovascular surgeon at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. I operated on 1,400 hearts. I know what it looks like when something is structurally sound and what it looks like when it's about to fail. I knew what my son's marriage looked like from the first dinner I sat across from her. Her name was Tara. She was 34, which made her 8 years younger than my son Philip. She was beautiful in that particular way that makes other people nervous. The kind of beautiful that knows exactly what it's doing. She laughed at all the right moments during dinner and asked me careful questions about my retirement. And when I said I was thinking about setting up a charitable foundation for pediatric cardiac care, she asked how much that typically required. Not what inspired me, not why pediatric care, how much. I noted it. I'm a surgeon. I was trained to notice things that don't quite fit. Philip had been living in Charlotte for 6 years, working in commercial real estate. He was good at it. Good enough to have built something real, something I was proud of. But commercial real estate in Charlotte in 2022 wasn't what it had been. Interest rates went up. 3 deals he'd been counting on collapsed inside of 4 months. He came to me that November, hat in hand, asking if I could help cover his operating costs while he restructured. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. What I didn't fully understand then was that Tara had already been doing her arithmetic for months. My net worth at the time was approximately $3.2 million. The house in Buckhead, my retirement accounts, a portfolio my late wife had helped me build over 30 years. Sylvia died in 2019. Breast cancer. She was 61, and she deserved 30 more years, and she didn't get them. After she died, I updated my will, half to a pediatric cardiac foundation we talked about starting together, half to Philip, with a separate trust designated for his children if he ever had them. I had one other provision. A clause that most estate attorneys consider standard, but that most families never discuss openly if a beneficiary was found to have engaged in fraud, coercion, or undue influence against the testator. Against me, their inheritance would transfer entirely to the foundation. My attorney had suggested it. I'd agreed without much thought. I had no reason to think I'd ever need it. I was wrong about a lot of things in the year that followed, but I wasn't wrong about that clause. Philip and Tara moved into the guest suite in February. Just temporary, they said, while Philip stabilized the business. Just until things settled down. I was 66 years old, and I lived alone in a 4-bedroom house in Buckhead, and I genuinely thought it would be good to have family nearby. I thought it would feel less empty at dinner. I thought maybe we'd watch football on Sundays the way Philip and I used to when he was in high school. What actually happened was subtler than I expected and faster than I should have allowed. It started with my medication. I take a statin for cholesterol and a low-dose beta blocker, standard maintenance for a man my age who spent 30 years under fluorescent lights eating vending machine sandwiches between surgeries. Simple prescriptions, nothing complicated. Tara started managing them. She offered to organize my pill case, said she'd noticed I sometimes forgot the evening dose. I let her. That was my first mistake. It started with the medication, and then it moved to my calendar. She offered to manage my appointments, my cardiologist, my golf league, my biweekly lunch with my old colleague Raymond. No, wait. Raymond was on the list. Let me call him Robert. My old colleague Robert, who I'd worked alongside for 19 years. Tara started managing my calendar. She started answering my phone when I was in the other room. She started, gradually, over weeks. So slowly I didn't register it happening, positioning herself between me and anyone who might notice changes in me. What I noticed first was the fatigue. I've always slept well. 6 hours, out cold, up before dawn. A surgeon's schedule resets your circadian rhythm like a factory setting. But starting in March, I was sleeping 10, 11 hours. I was foggy in the mornings in a way I'd never been. I assumed it was grief, delayed grief for Sylvia, catching up with me now that I had less to keep me busy. I assumed it was age. It wasn't grief. It wasn't age. It took me 6 weeks to figure out what it was, and I only figured it out because I am a doctor, and I happened to pick up my pill case on a morning when Tara wasn't home, and I counted the capsules and realized there were more than there should have been. I took one to a pharmacist I trusted, a woman named Carol who'd filled my prescriptions for 11 years. She called me back the same afternoon. "Norman," she said, "this isn't your beta blocker." It was a benzodiazepine. Low dose, not dangerous at the level I was taking it, not acutely, but cumulative, over weeks, in a 66-year-old man, absolutely sufficient to produce cognitive cloudiness, memory lapses, the appearance of early cognitive decline. I stood in my kitchen and I understood what was happening. I didn't say anything. Not to Philip, not to Tara. I went to my study, I called my attorney, and I started making notes. What followed was 8 months of the most disciplined acting I have ever done, and I spent 31 years in operating rooms where the rule is, do not let them see you sweat. I stopped taking the modified pills. I started taking my actual medication, which I began picking up myself and storing in my car. I let myself appear confused. I repeated questions I knew the answers to. I misplaced things on purpose. I watched Tara watching me, and I watched what she did when she thought I wasn't looking. She made phone calls, long ones, to a man whose name I eventually identified as her brother, a real estate attorney in Savannah. She went through my filing cabinet twice. I'd installed a small camera in the study by then, pointed at the cabinet, after I told them it was a smoke detector battery I was replacing. She photographed documents. She photographed my will. Then Philip came to me in April with papers. "Dad, we've been talking," he said. He couldn't look at me directly. He never could when he was doing something he knew was wrong. Even as a boy, age 9, telling me he hadn't broken the neighbor's window. He'd look at my shoulder, not my eyes. He was looking at my shoulder now, with everything going on, with how tired you seemed lately. We thought it might make sense to set up a durable power of attorney. Just so someone can manage things for you if you need it. It's standard. Your attorney can explain it. "Which attorney?" I asked. He named one I'd never heard of. Not my attorney. Not David Chen, who'd handled my estate for 15 years. A new one. Tara's brother's colleague in Savannah. I said I'd think about it. I called David Chen that evening. David is the kind of attorney who doesn't alarm easily. He's been practicing estate law in Atlanta for 22 years, and he has the affect of a man who has heard everything and is surprised by very little. When I described what was happening, he was quiet for a long moment. "Are you recording these conversations?" he asked. "Since March." Another pause. "Good, don't stop. And Norman, don't sign anything. Not a grocery list, not a birthday card. Nothing they put in front of you without calling me first." I didn't sign anything. What I did instead, over the following weeks, was create a paper trail of my own. I had David draft a new amendment to my will. Not changing the substance, just reaffirming it, witnessed by 2 neighbors I'd known for 20 years and a notary at the UPS store 3 miles from my house. I opened a separate checking account at a different bank, one Tara didn't know about, and began moving liquid assets there incrementally. Nothing dramatic, just housekeeping. I also began asking questions I already knew the answers to, but asking them in writing, by email to Philip. "Hey, just wanted to confirm, you're not using my secondary credit card for anything, right? The one in the drawer?" "Of course not, Dad. just the one you gave us for household expenses. The secondary card had $4,300 in charges since February. Spa treatments, restaurant dinners, 2 weekend trips to Highlands, North Carolina. I forwarded that email chain to David. The recording that played in the courtroom came from May. I'd had dinner with my old colleague Robert the week before, and I told him everything. Robert is a cardiologist. He is not an excitable man. He listened to the whole thing over 2 hours and a bottle of Merlot, and then he said, "What do you need from me? I need you to come for dinner next Saturday. I need you to seem like a casual visit, and I need you to know that if anything happens to me in the next few months, you know where the recordings are." He came for dinner. Nothing happened that night, but 2 days later, Philip and Tara sat at my kitchen table and had a conversation they believed. I couldn't hear. I was supposedly napping. My bedroom door closed, the baby monitor I'd repurposed transmitting to the small recorder in my nightstand. Tara's voice first. "The incompetency route takes too long. Adult Protective Services gets involved. There are evaluations, 6 months minimum before a guardian is appointed." Philip said something I couldn't make out. "I know it's uncomfortable, but look at what he has, Philip. $3 million, and he's going to give half of it away to children he's never met. If we file the POO paperwork we already have, the one he thinks he's going to review, and we get it notarized before he talks to Chen again. He trusts Chen. Then we need him to stop trusting Chen. We tell him Chen overcharged him. We tell him Chen made errors on the Sylvia estate. We find something. A silence. And if that doesn't work, then we move to the next option. There's a facility in Gainesville. Private. The intake coordinator there is flexible about documentation requirements. I lay in my bed with my eyes open, and I listened to my son discuss committing me to a memory care facility I didn't need, to gain control of assets I'd spent 31 years building. And I thought about Sylvia. I thought about what she would have said. I thought about how she always told me Philip needed a stronger hand than I gave him, that I'd let him coast on charm when he should have been learning consequences. She was right. She was usually right. I pressed stop on the recorder. I called David Chen. The attorney they'd hired, a man named Patterson from Savannah, was good. I'll say that. He was smooth in front of the jury, and he was clearly billing hourly because he never used 10 words when 40 would do. His opening argument was straightforward. I was an aging man, isolated, struggling with grief after my wife's death, who had misinterpreted normal family concern as malicious conspiracy. Philip and Tara had genuinely been worried about my cognitive state. The power of attorney they'd sought to file was a loving precaution, not a scheme. The credit card charges had been made with my implicit approval. I'd given them the card. I'd never set restrictions. I'd never asked for an accounting. David's response was quiet and devastating. "Mr. Cementoren, Hale did give his son access to a household expenses card. He did not give his son access to spa weekends in the mountains, and the question of implicit approval becomes considerably harder to argue when the defendants are recorded discussing how to have the approving party institutionalized." Patterson tried the cognitive decline angle hard, brought in a neurologist who'd never examined me to testify about the general effects of grief and isolation on elderly men. David put me on the stand. "I've testified in medical malpractice cases. I know how a courtroom works. I know how to speak to a jury, clearly, without condescension, with enough humanity that they understand you're a person and not a resume." Patterson cross-examined me for 2 hours. He tried to make me seem calculating, vindictive, a father who'd set a trap for his own son out of spite. "Mr. Derver, Hale, you installed cameras in your home without telling your son. I installed cameras in my home. It's my home. You recorded private conversations. I recorded conversations that occurred in my house, on my property, about my estate without my knowledge. Georgia is a one-party consent state. I was a party. You moved assets without disclosing this to family members who were living with you. I moved my own assets in a free country. Do I need permission from house guests?" The jury actually smiled at that. Patterson moved on. His last attempt was the one that mattered most to him, I think. He leaned against the rail and asked me with something approaching genuine curiosity, "Mr. Hale, isn't it true that you could have simply asked your son what his intentions were? That you could have had a direct conversation rather than an 8-month covert operation?" I looked at him. "I could have," I said. "And he could have not tampered with my medication. He could have not photographed my will. He could have not recorded a conversation about placing me in a facility without my consent. He had 8 months of opportunities to come to me honestly. He did not take one of them. I documented what was actually happening. There's a difference between surveillance and self-defense." Patterson had nothing after that. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I spent them at Robert's house in Decatur, eating his wife's cooking and sleeping, deeply and cleanly for the first time in months. When the call came, I was sitting on his back porch drinking coffee and watching his bird feeders. We drove to the courthouse together. The gallery was full. Stories like mine don't stay quiet in Atlanta. Retired Emory surgeon, son charged with elder fraud and conspiracy. It had been in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution twice. People I'd operated on sent me letters. People I'd never met sent me letters. Philip looked thin. Prison-issued clothes don't fit right on anyone, but on Philip they looked especially wrong. He'd always dressed well, always cared about the small details of how he presented himself. He got that from his mother. Tara sat beside him. She hadn't looked at me since the trial started. The jury filed in. On the charge of elder financial abuse against Philip Hale, guilty. On the charge of fraud against Philip Hale, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud against Philip Hale, guilty. On the charge of criminal tampering, the medication, against Tara Hale, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty. On the charge of elder financial abuse, guilty. The courtroom didn't erupt the way you see in movies. There was a kind of collective exhale. A woman behind me said, "Oh, thank God," very quietly, like a prayer. Philip looked at the ceiling. Tara closed her eyes. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Judge Elaine Forsyth, 22 years on the Fulton County bench. The kind of judge who doesn't perform seriousness, but simply is serious. Addressed the courtroom without theatrics. "What occurred here," she said, "was not a family dispute or a misunderstanding or a case of poor communication. What occurred was a calculated, sustained attempt to strip an elderly man of his autonomy, his assets, and ultimately his freedom, perpetrated by people he housed, fed, and trusted." She sentenced Philip to 14 years in the Georgia Department of Corrections. Tara received 12 years, plus a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with me. Joint restitution, $487,000, representing the fraudulent dollars representing the fraudulent credit card charges, my legal fees, and compensatory damages for the medication tampering. Their assets were seized immediately. The Charlotte condo, which I later learned had been partially purchased with funds Philip had borrowed from me under false pretenses, sold at auction. The 2 cars, Tara's jewelry. They owed me $487,000. The seizures recovered $203,000 of it. The rest would follow them as a debt for the rest of their lives. After the hearing, as the guards were preparing to transport them, Philip turned toward me. I don't know what he expected to see. Satisfaction, maybe. Or regret. Some emotion that would make the whole thing easier to categorize. I walked to within a few feet of him. The guard allowed it. "You know what I keep thinking about," I said quietly. "Your mother. What she would say." He didn't answer. She'd have been devastated. Not by what I did, by what you did. She spent 30 years watching me operate on hearts that were failing, and she told me once that the saddest part wasn't the hearts that gave out from disease. It was the ones that gave out from disease. It was the ones that gave out from neglect. The ones that failed because someone just stopped taking care of them. I stepped back. "You stopped taking care of yours a long time before this started." He said my name. Just once. "Dad." Like a question he didn't know how to finish. I turned and walked out of the courthouse with Robert beside me into October sunlight in Atlanta, and I didn't look back. I sold the Buckhead house 4 months later. It was the right house for the life Sylvia and I built together. 4 bedrooms, the big kitchen she loved, the back garden she planted the year we moved in. It was not the right house for the life I was building now. I sold it for $1.4 million to a young family from Alpharetta, 2 kids, a third on the way. The father, a software engineer, who asked very earnest questions about the garden irrigation system. I showed him how the timer worked. I hope they're happy there. I bought a smaller place in Decatur, 2 bedrooms, a study, a screened porch that faces east so I get the morning light. It cost $620,000. I have never been more comfortable in a house in my life. The remaining money, after the sale, after taxes, after everything, I divided the way Sylvia and I had always planned. The Pediatric Cardiac Foundation she'd wanted to build got $800,000, enough to fund its first 3 years of operation. I named it after her. The Sylvia Hale Foundation for Pediatric Cardiac Care. It will outlast me. Another $300,000 went to the Georgia Elder Law Justice Project, a non-profit that helps seniors navigate exactly the kind of predatory guardianship schemes that Tara had researched. They'd helped 4 families in the past year alone. They'll help more. I kept the rest. I'm 67 years old, and I earned it, and I intend to spend some of it on things that bring me joy. A trip to Portugal I've been putting off for years. A better golf bag. Dinners with Robert and his wife that don't involve me watching my back. I'm sitting on my screened porch as I write this. It's early morning, the kind of cool, quiet October morning that Atlanta does better than anywhere. There's a red-tailed hawk that hunts the tree line behind my fence most mornings, around 7. I've started leaving the porch earlier so I don't miss him. My phone is on the table beside me. I've been using it to outline a book. David suggested it, half-jokingly, after the trial. A Surgeon's Guide to Protecting Yourself from Inheritance Fraud. Elder Financial Abuse, what it looks like, how it starts, what you can do before it becomes a courtroom. My literary agent, a friend of Robert's wife, thinks there's a real market for it. Apparently, I'm not the only 60-something professional who never considered that the person most likely to exploit them might live in their guest room. I don't plan to discuss Philip much in the book. There will be a chapter, anonymized, legally reviewed, about what happened. But the book isn't about him. It isn't about Tara. It's about the 1,400 hearts I operated on over 30 years and what I learned about the difference between systems that are structurally compromised and systems that are simply under stress. About how to tell the difference before it becomes an emergency. About how sometimes the most important thing a doctor can do, the most important thing anyone can do, is catch a problem before it becomes irreversible. Do I grieve Philip? Yes, but I grieve the version of him that existed before he decided what I was worth in dollars. That version played Little League badly and laughed at his own jokes, and once at age 12 cried in my car after a friend moved away and let me put my arm around him without pulling back. That version I mourn, genuinely. The man who sat in my kitchen talking about flexible intake coordinators at private memory care facilities. I don't know him. I never did. The hawk just landed on the fence post at the edge of my property. He's sitting with the absolute stillness that predators have. The stillness that isn't patience but is something more precise. He knows exactly what he's looking for. He knows exactly how long to wait. I refill my coffee. I watch him. There is something to be said for that kind of clarity. People ask me sometimes whether I feel guilty, whether setting up those cameras, keeping those recordings, playing confused for 8 months while my son and his wife planned to strip me of everything, whether any of that sits wrong with me now that it's over. It doesn't, and I've thought about why, carefully, the way I used to think through a difficult surgery, not to justify myself. Just to understand. Here's what I keep coming back to. Every single thing that happened to Philip and Tara was the direct result of a choice they made, not one choice. Dozens. Philip chose to let Tara run the numbers on my estate over dinner with me sitting right there. He chose to bring me papers drafted by a stranger in Savannah instead of calling David Chen, the attorney he'd met at Sylvia's funeral. He chose, on a Tuesday morning in May, to sit at my kitchen table and talk about flexible intake coordinators at private memory care facilities, while I lay in the next room listening to every word. Tara chose to put something in my medication. She made that choice, and then she made it again the next morning and the morning after that. Choices compound. That's not a philosophical position. It's just physics. A small decision in one direction makes the next small decision easier. Philip spent 20 years taking a path of least resistance, and Tara gave him a path that looked like it led somewhere. By the time they were in that courtroom, 14 years of consequences had already been set in motion by 100 small surrenders to the easier, worse version of themselves. I'm not angry at them. I was briefly when Carol called me from the pharmacy and told me what was in my pill case. That was real anger. The cold, clarifying kind that a surgeon feels when he opens a chest and finds damage that didn't have to be there. Damage caused by neglect, by someone not paying attention to something that mattered. But anger like that has a purpose, and then it's finished. It told me what I needed to know. After that, I just worked. What I want people to take from this, if they take anything, is something simpler than revenge and harder than forgiveness. It's this. The most important thing I did in those 8 months wasn't install the cameras or move the assets or preserve the recordings. The most important thing I did was refuse to stop being myself. I kept thinking clearly. I kept asking questions. I kept trusting the people I'd earned the right to trust over decades. David, Robert, Carol. I didn't let fear make me stupid or grief make me passive. Philip counted on me being too tired and too lonely to fight. He was wrong about that. Not because I'm exceptional, because I paid attention. Sylvia used to say that integrity isn't what you do when people are watching. It's the habit you build when they're not, so that when it matters, you don't have to think about it. You just do it. She built that habit her whole life. I'm still working on mine. The hawk still comes to my fence post most mornings. I still watch him. There's something I find steadying about an animal that knows exactly what it is and what it's there to do. No performance, no strategy beyond the one the situation requires, just attention. Patience, precision. That's enough. Most of the time, that's exactly enough.